All right, well, good morning and welcome everyone. We're so glad to have you at our TNT conference this morning. Welcome to our first session, which today is a strategic approach to EdTech. And I have the privilege of introducing our speaker this morning. But before I turn it over to our fabulous presenter, I just want to go over a few notes. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Sarah Goodell, and I am the Events and Training Specialist in Adult Education Services, and I will be serving as your friendly moderator for today. As we go along, if you have any questions, please make use of the chat box. We are going to be monitoring that to get all of your questions answered. And at the end of our time together today, I will be dropping a link into a survey in the chat. So please, please, please take some time to fill that out. So we can make sure to hear what you thought about our presentation today. And the last note is that we are recording and you are all muted, so just please keep an eye out to make sure that you're on mute, and we'll be monitoring as well. This morning, I have the privilege of introducing Rachel Riggs, who is the Digital Learning Specialist in the EdTech Center at World Education. Without further ado, Rachel, please take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and good morning. Like Sarah said, I work at the EdTech Center at World Ed, and I'm really excited to be joining you guys this morning. I join you from Maryland, where we got a couple of inches of snow today. So my son is home with me. If he happens to come interrupt us talking about Pokemon cards, I apologize in advance. Happy New Year to everyone. And let's get started. We've got a lot to cover today. So what we'll kind of talk about today is a strategic approach to EdTech. What are the steps that you can take to incorporate more strategy in your use of technology in the classroom? So we'll talk about some EdTech frameworks that we'll explore, and you can determine how useful they are to you, or if you need to create your own framework. We'll talk about evaluating EdTech tools. What are some of the questions to ask yourself when you are looking at a new tool and considering whether or not you should use it? And then we'll just briefly touch on EdTech routines and how after you've chosen tools, you can start implementing reliable routines. There are a couple of ways, oh gosh, my animations are a little jumpy. A couple of ways you can participate this morning. And first and foremost, the chat box. I want you guys to participate in whatever way is most comfortable for you. So if opening the chat box and putting questions or ideas or responses there is good for you, then that's good for me. We will have one activity using Jamboard, which you don't need a login or anything. It's just going to be a link and we can all collaborate in the Jamboard. And then finally, I have created a Google Docs worksheet for you guys, and I'm going to share the link to that now. What's going to happen is it's a copy link. So you'll see a screen asking if you want to make a copy. And if you make a copy, it's going to give you your own individual worksheet in your Google Drive. So I'm going to plop the link there in the chat box now. Feel free to open it. I'll prompt you when there are things that you can do in it, but it's also something that maybe after the presentation you'll want to refer back to. It has some links and whatnot in there. So what is an EdTech tool? I think over the last couple of years, we've probably all become very familiar with this term, but basically an EdTech tool is an educational technology tool, and it's a digital tool that's used for learning or teaching. Some examples of categories of tools would be assessment tools like a Google form, many other assessment tools. If you guys, I know people love to hear what names of different tools. So as I'm going through the categories, if you are like, oh, this is the assessment tool I use, and you want to plop that in the chat, please feel free to do that. Communication tools, some communication tools like Remind, it's a texting app to communicate with your students. Learning management tools like Canvas or Blackboard. Creation tools, which can really run the gamut, but presentations, creating spreadsheets or Word documents, and then collaborative tools, tools that bring learners together and allow them to share information or create ideas together. So first, I want to know, where are you with EdTech? I've heard that people are either overwhelmed with EdTech or overusing EdTech. I don't agree necessarily with those two categories, but I think it is kind of like, oh, maybe I am either overwhelmed or overusing. I want to know, are you, one, just getting started? Two, you feel like you're ahead of the game, you're good to go, or three, you're all over the place. You like maybe love EdTech and you're collecting tools, but you've not, like, they're kind of going everywhere. Okay, we got some threes, ones, a two, great. 1, 3. We need you all. We need you all. We're going to need your input throughout the presentation. So I'm glad to hear. So yeah, if you fit into that 3 category, that's definitely where I was. When I developed this presentation, essentially, I was just collecting, getting trained on all these different tools, but wasn't really thinking about a meaningful strategy for implementing them. So that's great. If you're just getting started, you're going to hear lots of great ideas for how you can get started so that you have the structure there ahead of time. And if you're ahead of the game, then we're leaning on you to be sharing your ideas and different tools that you use throughout the presentation. So please, all of you, I'm not sure be vocal. Oh, Siri's talking to me. Okay. All right, so first of all, we're going to look at frameworks, using a framework. Frameworks are beneficial because they give you a structure for the way that you're approaching educational technology. So rather than just kind of, oh, I use a tech tool for this, this, and this, but I have nothing that I'm using for this, it kind of gives you a way to holistically look at what you do in the classroom and how technology could support the learning that is already going on in your classroom. So a framework will help you look at, oh, you know what, I don't have tools for this, or maybe you'll look at a certain area and say, I have a lot of tools that are accomplishing the same purpose. So maybe that area is cluttered and I want to just focus on using one tool for that routine or strategy. The first example we're going to look at was created by a group in St. Paul, Minnesota, and they were developing a curriculum on customer service for ESOL, for English language learning students. And so they started with first their objectives, but then different language domains like vocabulary, reading comprehension, grammar, listening, and then the final assessment. And what they did was they connected each of those domains with a tool and implemented routines and strategies to support those overall learning objectives. Now, I want to know, when you're looking at this image, is there anything that you notice about the framework or the tools that they chose? Anything that jumps out to you? You can put it in the chat for me. Google, yeah, great. Yeah, yes. All of those tools are Google tools. So what is the benefit of using all Google tools? Kimberly nailed one down, right? They're all free, which is great. Yeah, similar UI or user interface. So it's going to have kind of a similar layout, similar buttons. Absolutely. Any other ideas? User friendly. Yeah, Google tools typically are. Students are usually familiar. Absolutely. Yep. Now I'm wondering, okay, so we look at the tools and we think, okay, a collection of Google tools that could be useful. What about the framework? Is this a framework that would work for you? Could you map out your use of EdTech by starting with objectives, going down to different skills, and then going down to different tools and establishing routines in that way? Is this a framework that you think is useful to you? You don't have to answer that, but you certainly can. Okay, we have a yes, we have some yeses, great. Okay, let's look at another example framework. The second one was created by a group in New York. Oh, Robert, good question. Why are spreadsheets linked to grammar? So these are just like routines that they made. So I'm assuming, I wasn't in the class, but for example, maybe they were organizing different grammar forms in a spreadsheet and having students give examples in the cells within that column or something to that effect. I've seen some teachers use spreadsheets for grammar in that way. If you're a teacher who uses spreadsheets for grammar and you want to share another idea with Robert, that'd be great. Go ahead in the chat. So this second framework was created by a group in New York, And they, this is specifically for remote teaching, and they kind of identified these different categories, or what they call 7 elements, and encompass them in these 3 key practices. So you'll look at the elements and see that they have a whiteboard, an assessment tool, and kind of thinking through, okay, what is every tool we need for the things and the goals that we have in the classroom. And then they have the 3 practices that encompass all of them, which are strive for presence, interactivity is key, and let students do the work. So I like this model. I think it's really helpful, specifically for remote instruction. Anything that jumps out to you guys about this framework or this approach? Yeah, I like that too. I like the practices that encompass those elements. I think that's good to have that in the forefront. Great. Yeah, Marlena says it considers teacher needs and student needs, right? So whereas in the previous one, we might not see a learning management system, but maybe for a teacher, that is something that's really key to tracking students' progress. Thanks for sharing that idea, Amy. Some LMSs include several of these categories. Yes, that's true too, Jana. So we might see that one tool might have like so many of these other categories fit in it. And so that's something to think about as we consider using a framework. What are ways that we can modify it that make sense for us, right? It's not a one size fits all. Okay, let's look at the 3rd framework, and then we're going to share some tools. This one was created by Crowded Learning, and it's kind of a guide, but it breaks tools down into 3 categories and asks some key questions that help you evaluate the tools and figure out your approach to some of these areas. So the first area is communication. How do I communicate with students, and what tools do I need to do that? What are the logistics? Content, how do I deliver content to students? And then finally, management and tracking. How do I manage students and keep records and track progress? Okay, so those are 3 great examples. Like I said, there's no one size fits all, but it really helped me when I was in that all over the place space to think about, okay, what categories do I need, or what am I doing in the classroom that I need a tool for? And rather than collecting all these tools, how can I think of a roadmap that's going to give my students a consistent and kind of easy experience with technology in my classroom? So what we're going to do now is jump over to a Jamboard. A Jamboard is a collaborative digital whiteboard. And in this Jamboard, we have 3 frames. The first frame is that first framework we looked at. The second is the second, and the third is the third. So I want you guys to jump into the Jamboard and plug sticky notes into the different areas, okay? So for example, if you're on frame 2 and you see assessment tool, add a sticky note that tells us what tool you use for assessment. So we're just listing tools right now. What do you use? What EdTech tools do you use? All right, I'm going to put the link to the Jamboard in the chat, and then I'll do a little tutorial for those who haven't used Jamboard, and then those of you who have can just feel free to start adding your sticky notes. Give me a minute, my computer's going a little slow. It's like, all these people from Arizona, you're expecting me to connect you this distance on a snow day? All right, there's the link to the Jamboard. Some of you might get locked out. It does have a limit on the number of people that can be collaborating in there at the same time. So if you're not able to enter in, please feel free to just put in the chat what tools you're using and for what purpose. So if you're new to Jamboard, when you get in, over on the left, you're going to see a toolbar, and there's a sticky note button. And what I want you to do is click on that, add the name of a tool. So let me see, listening practice. I use YouTube for listening practice, okay? You can change the color up here, or you can just save the sticky note. And once you save it, it's going to go into this pile, and you can move it to the correct category, okay? So click the link, click on sticky note over in the toolbar, type your tool, and then move it on the screen. Now, if you want to get to a different framework, you're going to go to the top middle of your screen and click the right arrow to get to a different framework. And you can feel free to add your sticky notes to any of the frameworks. If you need to delete one, like I see someone wrote I use and didn't finish that one, you can click on this little ellipsis in the top right of the sticky note to edit, duplicate, or delete your sticky note. So feel free to do that if you added one by mistake or didn't finish your answer. So go ahead, you guys, start adding. Oh my gosh, wow, frame 3 has a whole lot of tools on it already. We like framework 3. I do think it's a little more free flowing, you know, it's a little easier to categorize them just into those 3. Yeah, so we've got Zoom, Google Meets, Google Classroom. Frame 1 has a lot of action too. Great. These are great ideas. I always love doing this, seeing the different ways that people are using. Like Kahoot, I have not used for listening practice. So that's always interesting to me to see some people are using a tool for something that I wouldn't have thought of using it for. Okay, we've got Edpuzzle for listening and reading comprehension. I like Edpuzzle. This is great. Zeitboard. I have never heard of Zeitboard. Someone describe it quickly in the chat if you put that up there.
I like Zeitboard because you don't need to use an account and it's really fast. My students can't save any of their work on there, but I can very quickly pull it up without needing to fuss with anything. So I use it mostly for demonstration.
Nice. Awesome. Okay, and then we have some in the chat too. Someone added Cami to the chat. Cami is a great tool. You can transform PDFs and make them more interactive. There's lots of stuff you could do with Cami. This is great. Oh my gosh, I'm seeing so many. Okay, so you guys keep this open because what you're going to do is kind of think about your own framework. Where do you have gaps? And this is a great place to go. I always say start with other teachers. If you have gaps in an area like, oh, you know what, I really don't have a great tool for delivering content to my students, start with other teachers before you go anywhere else. You know, what do you use to share a collection of, you know, reading material with your students? And other teachers are always the best source to me. But if they are not helpful, then you can go to these other links that I've included in your worksheet. So I want you guys to go now to the worksheet, go to task 1, which is identify gaps in oversaturated areas. And just take a moment to think about what gaps do you have after you've looked at these frameworks? Did that highlight anything for you? Or is there an area that maybe you have too many tools going on? Go to your worksheet, go down to number 1 and answer that first question. Now, keep in mind, you're working in your own copy, so I can't see your answers. If you do want to share your answer and you want to put it in the chat, that's fine. But this is just a moment for you guys to kind of reflect on that activity. If you need the link to the worksheet again, just let us know. And if you have identified gaps, like I said, talk to another teacher, go to that Jamboard, see what people put in the Jamboard. But I've also included in the appendix of your worksheet 2 links to websites that can, they are specific to adult education and workforce development, but they're great websites just for finding EdTech tools and They're organized into categories, so it's nice to kind of browse and see what's there. So that's in the appendix section of your worksheet. 2 different websites for finding other tools. So we can start with our Jamboard, and then we have those if you're not finding what you need. All right, great. So before I move on, I want to hear in the chat from you guys what, oh sure, Ainsley, yeah, I'm gonna put the link to the worksheet in the chat again. And while some people are still answering that first question in task 1, does anybody want to put in the chat what pros and cons they see from using a framework to structure their use of EdTech? Any pros and cons? Maybe you're thinking, I don't have time to do that. Maybe you're thinking, that's great, that's going to help me in this way. Let me know in the chat. Great, thanks, Marlena. Keeps the purpose of the tool at the forefront of my mind. Yes. At the EdTech Center, a lot of people repeat this mantra, goals before tools, right? So what are the goals? What are we trying to accomplish? And then we choose the tools. And there's no perfect tool, but a tool that supports our goals is the ideal tool. Good. Okay. Identifying gaps is helpful. I enjoyed seeing what everyone else uses. Yeah, I like that too. I already have a window open for Freckle, which I've never heard of. I've never heard of Freckle either, and I'll be sure to go and explore that. Nick says a con is that you might feel restricted and not venture out to try something new. And that's totally valid. Good point, Nick. Amy, I really enjoyed just having the Jamboard. I'll be bookmarking that so I can refer back to it. Great. I'm so glad. Okay. Yes. Yeah. I like the second example too. I think it's really kind of holistic. Good. And like I said, no one size fits all. So what you do, you take this section and this section from this framework and this section and this section, you make your own kind of structure for what you'll do. All right, so we're going to move into section 2, which is about the tools. How do we evaluate the tools? So we've used our framework. We kind of know what we need. And then how do we get down to the granularity of looking at a specific tool and going through all of the details of whether that tool is useful to us. Now, this is called Rachel's hierarchy, which means that I made this up. There are great tool evaluation checklists out there. I find them to be a bit lengthy and overwhelming. So I've kind of condensed one in particular down into different sections that I think are useful to prompt our thinking on this. But what we're going to be looking at is a pyramid, a hierarchy of tool evaluation. And the most foundational concept of evaluating a tool is, what is its role in learning? What does the tool do? Is it effective in doing that? Is it based on evidence-based, solid instructional practices? And one of the reasons it's at the bottom is because it's the most foundational, and it also will take the most time. Figuring out the function of the tool and the features of the tool will probably be what is most time consuming as you're evaluating the tool. And then the second most time consuming thing is to look at the particulars of that tool and ask yourself, does it fit into my context? Is it good? Is it a good fit for the format of the classes I'm teaching? Is it a good fit for the profile of the learners that I'm working with? And is it a good fit for me as a teacher? And then support. Is there support? If I need help with the tool, can I find it? And is it easy to find? And then security. Is it a secure tool? Does it protect the user's privacy? And then finally, at the very top, you're gonna spend a little bit of time on this. It's important, but not all encompassing. Is there longevity there? And that's kind of, I know it's at the top, but it's like kind of low priority because you can't always say for sure whether a tool will stick around, but it is good to at least explore how popular it is. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. let's start with the role in learning, which is the most foundational and will probably maybe take you the most time to identify. What is this tool's role in learning? So first of all, we want to look at effectiveness, right? Does the tool align with evidence-based strategies, whatever tool I'm using? I think a great reference for this, or a great place to go, is to the Learner Variability Navigator. And I'm going to put that link in the chat. But it's a great, it's an interactive website where you can look at the factors that impact your learners, and it will show you evidence-based strategies for teaching those learners. So let me go ahead and put the link to that in the chat. It's fun to use. And hold on a second, it's in your appendix too, so that's where I'm grabbing it from. It's fun to use, and it's really important to keep our minds fixed on, on that. What do we know works for learners before we get into the technology? Okay, so that's in the chat box, a link to the Learner Variability Navigator. But that's just, the first thing you want to ask. Does it align with evidence-based strategies? Is it something that I believe will actually contribute to learning and be effective? And then the next thing is just the function of the tool. What does the tool do? What are some of the features of the tool? How does it fit within my framework, right? So what does the tool do, and is it effective? Those are the two questions you want to start with, and it's going to take some playing around, some experimenting with the tool, some looking at, okay, here's a tool and it has this feature, this feature, this feature. I would use it in this way, kind of thinking that through, just basically what is the function and effectiveness. All right, so let's go through this process a little bit. I started with my framework. I chose framework 1, or at least I know that vocabulary practice has to be somewhere in my framework. So I've got vocabulary, and I'm looking for a tool because I want to make vocabulary something that is a little more flexible for my learners. They could study at home. And I want to use technology because it's going to make it more accessible and engaging, right? So I'm starting with this section of my framework, vocabulary, and I'm thinking about evidence-based instruction. I know that vocabulary requires explicit instruction and lots of practice opportunities. So I look at these two flashcard EdTech tools. The first one is Flippity, and the second one is Quizlet. Let me put links in the chat for anybody who's not familiar with those. I'm going to share links to some sample vocabulary sets within Flippity and Quizlet. Oh, my computer's so slow right now. Get out of there. Okay. So Flippity and Quizlet, I'm putting links in the chat in case you're not familiar, but both of them, Flippity is not specifically a flashcard tool. Quizlet is more specifically for that purpose. Flippity has a lot of different interactive activities on their site. Flippity is very do-it-yourself. So you would be creating all of the vocabulary sets from your own list of vocabulary that you want to focus on. And what you would do is put it in a spreadsheet, and then Flippity would generate flashcards for your learners. So it's very do-it-yourself. Whereas with Quizlet, you can create your own set, but you also can explore a library of other sets that have been created by teachers and learners, and you can make copies of them and adapt them. So Flippity is all, I have this vocabulary set, I want a very specific set, and I'm sharing it with my learners, I'm going to create it. Quizlet is a little more, oh, let's see what's out there, maybe I could use what somebody else has created. Flippity also provides a printable quiz for your students. And Quizlet has live in-class games and typing practice that you can do with your students. Otherwise, they're very similar. They both have flashcards. They both have practice opportunities. With both of them, you can look at the whole list of words. So otherwise, pretty similar tools. Now I want to know, what do you guys prefer? Just real quick. Flippity or Quizlet? Anybody use them and can tell me, what do you like better?
use Flippity, and I realized that Quizlet is also, you need to pay if you want some more information on it. Otherwise, you only have certain, I guess, applications or activities.
Yeah, good point, Rosa. And we're gonna get to that. We're gonna do another comparison of these two tools. Yeah, but this is just that basic flow, right? Framework, evidence-based practice, and then looking at the features and the function of the tool and seeing, does it fit into what I want? All right, let's move to the next one, which is the learning context. And we're gonna look at Flippity and Quizlet in that, within that criterion as well. But when we talk about learning context, I mean the actual context of learning, right? The classroom and the format of the class, but I'm also talking about teachers and learners. So is it a distance learning class? Is it hybrid? Is it in person? The specific thing that I'm looking for, like if I'm looking at vocabulary practice, does it have synchronous and asynchronous opportunities to use the tool, or is it specifically for one or the other? And then what technology do I have available to me within the class to use the tool, right? So in addition to all of that kind of related to the learning environment, there's the factor of who is the teacher and who are the learners that will be using the tool. Is it easy for them to use? What digital skills do they need in order to use the tool? What linguistic and cultural representation does the tool have that reflects the learners who are in the class using the tool? Is it affordable for the teachers and learners in that class? What is the user experience like? Is it a good experience? And is it compatible with other tools that are used in the class? Okay, I'm looking at the chat. I see a lot of stuff happening in the chat. Okay, a response to the Flippity versus Quizlet. And that's great. And we'll, like I said, we're about to compare them again, and we'll look at them a little more in detail. So these are a lot of factors that are important to consider, and probably the most important to consider, right? Like the people who will be using the tool and how will their interaction with it be. All right, so give me a second here. We're gonna look at a couple of different contexts, and we're gonna look back at Flippity and Quizlet and kind of decide based on the context what we like. Now, of course, these are all variable things. They're gonna change depending on the class. So I will never at any point in this presentation say, you should use Flippity or you should use Quizlet, because the whole point is that your selection should change based on what your needs are and what your learners' needs are. So let's look at Flippity and Quizlet again and consider a couple of different factors. Let's say that we're teaching a class that is synchronous remote. So we are teaching every lesson over Zoom, and all of the students are joining Zoom at the same time. So we have a whole class on Zoom and we're teaching the lesson. Which tool would you use for a synchronous remote class? And maybe give me a why. There's no right or wrong answer. Like every teacher says, even as they're thinking of the right answer. Okay. Could use either, Paul says. Okay, and then someone says, I like Jeopardy on Flippity. Okay, so you like Jeopardy on Flippity, and that would be a fun synchronous remote activity. I totally agree. We've got Quizlet for the game aspect. Yes, Quizlet has the live game. So maybe that's something you want to play with all of your students all connected at the same time. Okay, great. Like I said, no right answer. Just kind of thinking about, as we look at tools, what should we consider? All right, let's now say that you're teaching a class where you know all of your students complete their homework on mobile phones. And which tool do you think would be a better fit? So again, considering the learners, who are the learners? Now, of course, we would have to actually test the tools on a mobile phone to know which one is better, right? Did anybody do that? Is anybody joining us from a mobile phone who clicked on on the links? I'm curious. Okay, it doesn't seem like it. Does anybody have experience with both of these tools? Okay, Jana says, I've used both on mobile phones just fine. Okay, great. So then we don't even need to think that deeply about that one. Anybody else who has used both of these tools with learners on mobile phones or personally on mobile phones who wants to add to that? I'll just add that Quizlet has an app. It has a smartphone app. And so that doesn't make it any more or less compatible if I'm just, studying flashcards, but maybe if I can go to my phone and pull up the same set again really easily from that app, maybe that's something to consider. Great. Okay. And people are saying they've never had issues on either. Great. Okay, another factor, let's say that the teacher uses Google tools for everything else that they're doing in class. Which would you choose and why? Or maybe it doesn't, both are equal, and why? Okay, Rachel says for Quizlet, you can log in with your Google account. Not sure about Flippity. Yeah, that's true. So if you're mostly using Google tools and your class has Google accounts, they can sign in with their Google account rather than creating a separate account. But then, like Amy just brought up, Flippity uses Google Sheets, right? That's how you create Flippity interactive activities. So if the teacher is really comfortable with Google Sheets, then that's a benefit to them using Flippity. They're going to be able to kind of push out those vocabulary sets a little faster because they're already comfortable with that tool. And Jana says there's no sign in for Flippity. Yeah, so great. There's a Google sign in for Quizlet. For Flippity, there is no sign in. So they, would be fine. Great. Yeah. So again, no right or wrong answer, just things that we want to think about. All right, next question is, does the tool provide support? And when we think about, does the tool provide support, there are a couple of things we want to think about. First of all, onboarding, and you'll see I have the two circles representing a teacher and a learner because both need support, right? There are some tools that give the teacher a lot of support, but the learners don't get anything. There are some tools where a teacher can access tutorials and YouTube videos to see how do I use it, but learners can't access that same type of onboarding and training with the tool. So something to think about, is the onboarding provided for teacher and students? And how in depth is it, and is it adequate? And then troubleshooting. If a teacher runs into a problem, can they contact someone to work through it? And similarly, if a student does, can they contact someone to work through it? Is the support multilingual if you teach classes with multilingual learners? And is it flexible support? And when I say that, I mean, is it in different modalities? Could I call someone or chat someone or send an email to someone, depending on what I'm comfortable with? Maybe I don't know how to use email that well. So is there a phone number where I could talk to someone? So those are things to consider. No tool is going to be perfect in this area. No tool is going to be perfect in all of these areas of evaluation, but things to think about as we are vetting a tool. Okay, next one is the tool secure? So we want to think about what kind of data is collected by that tool. Here, specifically, personal identifiable information, PII, right? Does it collect that? And if it does, where is it stored? And who has access to it, right? So just overall security. When I put students into this, is it going to protect them and their privacy? Oh, what level of transparency? Yeah, so you also want to be able to find this information somewhere on the website or through the support channels to know, what kind of transparency the creators of that tool have provided. All right, so then our last one, longevity, hard to predict with technology, right? When we all love if we had a crystal ball and could say, oh, next year, the most popular tool is gonna be this. So let me learn it real fast and get on board. You can't really predict it that well, but there are websites out there that at least show you the most popular tools. So you can more or less know if it's really popular and getting a lot of use, it's gonna stick around. Other things to consider is, is the creator well known? So with our Google tools like Jamboard, Google's gonna be around for a while. So we can feel pretty confident knowing that we're not gonna have to pivot anytime soon. Have you heard about it from others, right? So that goes back to that popularity thing. Is it something that's commonly used? And then are there frequent updates? So, if we see a kind of beta tool out there that nobody is updating, it's going to run into a lot of glitches and stuff. So those are things to think about in terms of longevity. What I'm going to share in the chat now is a website. It's also in the appendix of your worksheet. It's called Top Tools for Learning. And that's where this image is from. It kind of shows you live charts of what's being used the most often for learning, and it's really helpful. Okay, Amy, yeah, good point. Amy is talking about Flippity versus Quizlet with security. So Flippity is all, the teacher kind of has everything, and students really don't need to put any information into Flippity at all. Quizlet, they at least are creating their own locked accounts. So, they have that level of security. But they do have to put in more information, their phone number, their email, and all of that. Okay, here's Top Tools for Learning in the chat box. Okay, great. Thanks, Jana. Yeah, so we're going into all of this. Longevity with Flippity versus Quizlet. Flippity is, and even support, we could say, right? Flippity is much more limited in those aspects. It seems to be run by one person, Jana says. I don't know how many people run it, but there's not as robust support, and there's not as many updates, although they do update it and it's functional. But I do remember there was a time where it like went out and nobody could use it for a while. Whereas with a Quizlet, it's a little more sophisticated in that way. Okay, good. Thanks for bringing that up regarding longevity, Jana. Okay. So I want you guys to jump over, before we move into our next section, I want you to jump over to task 2, evaluate EdTech tools. And what you'll, this is jumpy. Okay, so what you'll see in your worksheet, if you go down, is a chart here to compare 2 tools and see how the evaluation criteria help to align technology with educational goals and priorities. I want you guys to think of 2 tools and take a couple of minutes to fill this out. You don't need to fill out every section. I just want you to start brainstorming, and we have time to take like 3 minutes for you guys to start filling out this chart and comparing 2 tools with those criteria. Let me know in the chat if you have questions or if you need the link again. All right. So I hope you got the chance to at least kind of think about a couple of those areas. In the chat box, can someone complete this sentence for me? In the past, when evaluating tools, I hadn't thought of blank. So as you think about those different factors that we just looked at, maybe you thought of everything and more, in which case I give you big kudos. But was there one that kind of jumped out to you like, oh, you know what? I wasn't really thinking about that when selecting tools in the past. So in the chat, when evaluating tools in the past, I hadn't thought of blank. Okay, Janice says longevity. And then Rachel says security. Okay, it looks like a lot of people security. Yeah. And you know, that's a really tough one, right? Because what you're going to read the terms and conditions. Nobody does that. But it is easy enough to look at what are they asking me for? And you know, how can I know that this information is secure and private? Security and support. Some people are saying support. Yeah. And you know, I hadn't thought of that one until we started using Burlington English. I don't know if you guys use Burlington English, but oh, you do? Okay, awesome. So if you look at Burlington English, right, just extensive tutorials and support for teachers and students. And I just was so impressed. And the onboarding too, you know, they're always available to help teachers. And our reps, at least, were always saying, you know, if you need me to come to the class and help with your students, I can do that as well. So great. Okay, less is more. We only need to master the tools that fit our objectives and goals. Yes, I totally agree, Paul. I completely agree. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and move to our next section. And, you know, going into that less is more, something else I like to think about, and I have it in my notes here, but I haven't talked about it. That shows how much I actually use my notes. But, you know, how many apps are students having to download? And when we talk about longevity too, we could think about, is the student likely to continue using this tool after my class? If so, you've given them a lifelong tool to use, right? So if we're using things like Google Sheets or things that are applicable to the workplace, or things like Quizlet that they might go back to and find other vocabulary sets. So how much learner autonomy is available within that tool? And if I'm asking my students to download 10 apps just to take my 10-week course, maybe I need to rethink how many tools I have incorporated. Okay, so now our next section is about establishing reliable EdTech routines. And so that goes even to that question. It goes a little bit to what Paul said about less is more, but it also goes to a lot of digital literacy for teachers and learners, right? So if I have a technology that I can establish a routine with, I and the learners in my class or the learner that I tutor, however your format is, we both are becoming more confident and more proficient users of that technology. So we want to also think about incorporating EdTech routines instead of kind of these one-offs of, oh, we're going to use Jamboard today, but tomorrow we're using Padlet and the next day we're using Wakelet. How do we establish a routine so that students are becoming more proficient and autonomous in their use of that technology? I'm just going to jump to the chat real quick. That is a good thought. Thanks, Michelle. How many apps are my students downloading? Yeah, that's a really important thought. And you know, devices are personal. So, you know, how much space are you as a teacher taking up and invading that personal space of a student's smartphone or device? There's some great stuff in the chat. I had a phone with limited space. Yeah. And so I've run into that too, where I say to a student, you know, we're going to use this tool. Okay, everybody download on your phone. And then a student is like, I don't have any space on my phone and I don't know how to delete apps and I don't know how to clear the space. It's a good opportunity for me to help them with that, but it's an obstacle to whatever we are learning in that moment. How many passwords will the student need to manage? Yes, going back to that space in the phone, space in our brain, space in our amount of management that we can handle with passwords. And can they access the tech if they forgot their phone, right? Is it flexible enough for that? Oh, we're getting a lot of good conversation in the chat box. When I taught high school, there were still some students without smartphones. Yes, something else to think about. What devices do they have available? Seems like there's always some students. Yeah. So, just kind of thinking those things through and making sure we test things from the perspective of a learner. If I'm going to ask you to download this app, I should have it on my phone and be familiar with what it's looking like for you and what that process is. And that goes into routines too, because if we have a good routine, then we're not asking as much and everybody's feeling comfortable. Just like when we have those class warm-ups, and if that's part of our routine, everybody feels comfortable with it. And as we go along in class, people are more vocal and they just kind of are making it their own a little bit more once the routine is in place. So, okay, thanks, Kenyatta, I'm glad. So what I want to move to is called the EdTech Integration Strategy Toolkit. You may have heard of this before. It is a creation of Crowded Learning, which is part of the EdTech Center at World Education. But this is a great app. It's a beta version of an app, so you still have the chance to share your feedback, but I want you guys to take a moment to kind of explore it. It's not an app that will require much storage. So because you're not downloading it from the App Store, it's actually browser based. So what I'll do is you can interact with it on your computer or on your phone. It's up to you. I'm going to put the link into the chat box. As I said, this is flexible participation. If you go and explore that insofar as you desire to. But what I want you to pay particular attention to when you open this is the routines section. So a couple of examples of routines that you'll find in the app. Hold on, let's wait for my computer to load. The routines are engage and question, build knowledge, process and practice, respond and create, reflect and assess. So these are all super familiar lesson plan routines to all of us. And if you go into the app and click on routines, then you will actually find within engage and question recommended tools and procedures for implementing that routine. So that can be really helpful as well. And maybe this is your framework. Maybe these routines are your framework that you use to identify tools. Like I said, we're flexible there and whatever works the best. So I'm going to jump over to the app and just kind of do a quick exploration of it. And then how are we doing on time? We still have 22 minutes, right, Sarah? Did I get that right?
You did.
I'm not a math teacher, I'm an English teacher.
I'll give you a 5-minute warning, don't worry.
Okay, great, you'll keep me on track, good. Okay, so let's jump over and take a look. So if you didn't want to click on the link, you can just go back to Zoom and look at my screen. Give it a second. Okay, so this is the EdTech Integration Strategy Toolkit. Feel free to scan this QR code if you do want to look at it on your phone. What it does is it basically adds a tile that looks like an app, but really it's just a browser bookmark in your phone. So if I click here on routines, I can go to a routine like build knowledge. And then we see different tools or types of tools that are useful for building knowledge. So we have screen capturing tools, video meeting, learner management system, content curation. I like content curation. When I think build knowledge, I'm thinking about giving students materials that will help them learn. All of these are good, but I'm just saying I'm going to focus on that one here. So here is the routine: share a curated set of website links with learners. And then the recommended tool here is Wakelet. And we can look more by clicking on content curation. These are some tools that you can use for that routine. So we have Wakelet and Padlet. And then we have the routine details. What is the routine? What's the rationale behind it? What are the evidence-based strategies that support it? How do I do it? And then it even gives a list of the digital skills that the routine includes. Okay. So I want you guys to go back to your worksheet, and we're in task 3. And we're in question 3, review the EdTech strategy integration toolkit routine section. And I want to know either how would one of the routines be beneficial for you to implement, or is there an established EdTech routine that you currently use? So when you look at this, are you thinking, oh, yeah, I do this in my class, and it's a regular routine where I've implemented technology to support learning. So you can add that to your worksheet, that response, or if you want to put it in the chat, we'd love to hear what you said as well. If you need me to click around on the screen, show you something different on the screen, just let me know. I'm happy to do so. Okay, so either is there a routine that you want to start using that you think would be useful, or is there a routine you already had that now you're thinking, oh, I didn't even know I had this EdTech routine, but I do. Okay. Not hearing anyone sharing. I'm thinking maybe you guys are filling out your worksheet, which is great. Oh, we do have somebody. I tend to do a combination of presentation and practice with EdTech, where I show a slideshow or video, we discuss, and then I have the students do some online interactive practice. There you go. That's an EdTech routine. So there's that presentation with the slideshow or video, and then there's some practice element. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, so please forgive me if I'm not. Cher, would you please share what tool you use for presentation and maybe a tool that you use for practice?
Hi, yeah, Cherie, and
Cherie, I'm sorry.
oh, no problem. It's a tough one. So, I use actually a lot of YouTube and Khan Academy for math videos. I don't know if YouTube counts as ed tech anymore, or if it's just, so ubiquitous. But yeah, there's a lot of good short math instruction videos on both YouTube and Khan Academy. And then for practice, we use Delta Math, which is an interactive. I know my kids have used Prodigy and Elephant Math and a bunch of different ones in their school. And then somebody suggested that Freckle one today, so I was going to look into that for the interactive practice as well.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Okay, great. Yeah, so that's a great example of an instructional routine that Cherie has, and she's chosen tools that align with her routine that her students can become comfortable with, that she can become comfortable with, pushing them all into deeper proficiency with those tools. Does anybody else want to share an example of a routine? I thought that was so helpful. Either in the chat or you can unmute. We have time. I talked faster than I really expected to.
I can share.
Go ahead.
So I have a very similar approach like Cherie does. And I think that my biggest takeaway from today would be like to develop a set routine. Well, maybe not a set routine, but put together almost like a spreadsheet or a document where I can put the tools that I want to use so I remember that they're there. Because I feel like a lot of the tools, there's just so many. There are so
Right.
many websites nowadays. There's so many different things that you can choose from, and having that organization and then remembering that, oh my gosh, they're there, that I can use them. You know, I know my teammate and I email each other all the time. We're like, let's remember this for Q4, and that never happens. So I think developing a routine for me, I was thinking more in a planning sense where you can kind of write it down in an Excel or a spreadsheet or, you know, in your plans that you can go back to, and just have it in one place where you can refer to think, okay, this was really great for this type of lesson. If that makes sense.
Yes, that's a great idea. And, the level of formality that people put into lesson plans, of course, runs the gamut. But, if you have kind of a lesson plan template where, you're always going to do warm up, presentation, practice, comprehension check, whatever it is. And you kind of have those routines set. All we have to do here is plug in that tool. Then we know which technology that we have that supports each section of that lesson plan. And as we use our lesson plan template, or maybe it's just our lesson plan up here, we can, we're feeling comfortable and we know exactly kind of what we're using. We don't have to go through that exploration phase again every time, which can be challenging. Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for sharing. All right, I want to go ahead and start wrapping this up so that we can get to more conversation and questions. So that's the EdTech integration toolkit, EdTech strategy integration toolkit, it's a long name. For more about all of this, I would recommend two things. Today, there is a presentation from the Besties group. If you're in the Besties group and you're here, then yeah, we're excited to see your showcase. They're doing a showcase based off of a course that they took that goes through a lot of these same, what do I call them, principles. So there's that today at 2:40 if you want to go to that. And then within the next year, there will be another opportunity to take the BEST course. So, speaking with whoever is your PD leader about that opportunity, you could dive deeper into a lot of this. So a moment to reflect and think about and please critique me. What EdTech tools were used in today's presentation? Did you feel that they contributed to the learning goals, and did they fit this context? So if you want to answer 1, 2, or 3 of those, I would love to hear kind of what you guys feel about the way that EdTech was implemented in this presentation as a way to think critically about the way we use EdTech. Any thoughts? Don't worry, I'm very thick-skinned, so. Okay, Kimberly says that they help make it interactive. Okay, good. I'm glad. That was the goal. So we use Zoom, right? Video conferencing app. We use the chat feature in Zoom, and then we use Jamboard and Google Docs. So I think that's all the tools we used. And how do you feel? Jamboard to collaborate, great. Great. We use Jamboard for interaction. The Google Doc was helpful. Great, because you have access to links to go back to later. Awesome. Okay, and I think that's a good, this is a good practice. Just thinking about as you're doing lesson reflection, what did I use and did it really contribute? Did it really give my students that little extra edge or that little extra bit of engagement? Think through these questions and ask your students. What tools do we use? What technology do we use today? And did you like it? Are you happy with it? Get them to be more a part of that conversation. Great. I'm glad you guys liked it. Okay, cool. I want to move on to any questions that you guys have or open discussion. So is there anybody who would like to unmute or put in the chat a question, or even just, wow, this was great, I hadn't thought of this, or I had thought of this and this is what I do. Anything. I would love to hear from you guys.
Hey, I just unmuted. This is Jana. Oh, I think my camera's off. So my big issue is I like all the tools. I like elements of all the tools. Like with vocabulary, if I want this kind of practice and that kind of practice and another kind of practice, then I want to use like Quizlet for the first type and a Flippity for the second type and WordWall for the third type. I want to use all of them because there is no one tool that's going to do it all. And it's easy for me to like, oh, today we're doing this, today we're doing that, because I just like technology, but that is really not a good strategy for my students. So I just have a hard time like identifying which practice method. That's really where I get into it, is with the practice opportunities, and which practice is going to give me the most bang for my buck, and which practice opportunities am I going to have to like do away with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so here's an idea, right? A little test simulation you could do that I've done with family members or whoever you have available to you, really.
Yeah.
Gather somebody, right, who has no digital skills or very low digital skills.
My mom,
and
okay.
Comfort with technology, okay. I wasn't gonna name anybody. Good to know you have someone. And then maybe someone who's midway, and then someone who's great. Gather them together, throw the tool at them and see how they each interact, and do that with a couple of different tools. And then maybe it will uncover things. And the other layer of that is to do it with different devices. So have somebody on a laptop and somebody on a smartphone and see how is that looking different. Of course, you could do that too independently. How does it look on a smartphone? How does it look on a laptop computer, desktop computer? So that's, I think, one good place to start. And that's over the, COVID pandemic. That's kind of that was my go-to, because I knew I had a lot of learners on mobile phones who were joining my Zoom sessions. So I would ask family, I said, hey, I'm going to set up a Zoom meeting. I want you to join on your mobile phone, and I want you to click on the link in the chat and tell me how easy is it for you to navigate between Zoom and that Quizlet set, or things like that. I would run the scenarios by them. Obviously, that's time. Do you have the time? Do you have the resources? I hope you do. But I think it's a good place to start, just to kind of to think through if you're feeling like these are all great and I don't know which one to use, Yeah,
I love the idea of having a non-techie test it out, because they all look easy. From my perspective, they all look easy. Yeah. And I'm not always good at evaluating what's going to be easy and what's not. There's some really good comments in the chat.
Yeah, there are. And Paul, I hear you on that. I have my time limit, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be a fire hose. But, this is a starting point. And from here, I hope you'll go back to the worksheet and kind of whichever part of this was most beneficial to you. There are links and there's more practice and thinking you can do within the worksheet. I also taught basic ELLs. That was my kind of what most of my classes were composed of. So I know that it's a population, it's a learner population with specific challenges in this area, and probably the most challenging. So, do that experimentation, run through those scenarios, make sure that you're comfortable before you do anything with it. That's really a key too. So if you start with one tool and you get yourself comfortable with it, then you're gonna, the student transfer will come more naturally. It's a baby steps process, absolutely. Okay, let me see. A way around it would be building confidence and exploring what's in. Yeah, great. Thanks, Amy. Good. I'm glad that's helpful. Ashley, I like what Rachel wanted to integrate and utilize. Yeah, and that's important. I think Ainsley, or I don't know if that's the first and last name, but when we talk about students becoming proficient and autonomous, right, we want them to feel really comfortable, and we really want to push them into using the tool for their own purposes, right? So that's something I think about too, is like with Quizlet, I know if they create an account and I teach them how to do it, they can create their own vocabulary sets. So that's kind of that other level of autonomy where then they can leave my class and they can be studying new vocabulary on their own. So again, with tools that we know are used in the workplace, right? How can I push them to that next level of not just passively using the tool in my class, but being a creator with the tool and really managing the tool on their own and doing new things with it. That's like the level up from just I'm teaching with this tool. Yeah, Burlington English is great. Absolutely. They're very aware of what the challenges are. Sarah gave me a private 5-minute warning, just so everyone knows. And please do, yes, fill out the survey. Would love your feedback. Would absolutely take it and be able to make this a better presentation with it. So please do add your feedback to the survey. And with that, I'm going to say thank you guys so much. Feel free to reach out on email. I have a Twitter account if you want to follow me. But this was great. And you guys were a great audience. And I learned a lot. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Rachel. We're so glad that you took the time to present to us today. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We have a little bit of time before our next session, which begins at 11:25. So feel free to take a stretch break, but please do fill out that survey. We would love to implement your feedback for our next time that we're together for this TNT presentation. And I will drop it in the chat one more time in case you missed it. But if you need it for whatever reason, feel free to reach out to me and we'll get it to you. Thanks again. Have a wonderful day. And thanks, Rachel. We appreciate you.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Bye. Bye.